I've heard a lot of talk about what the Browns might do or what people are projecting that Jimmy Haslam is going to do in a reaction to a loss against Pittsburgh or a under 300 season or what teams normally do. We've talked about how this could play out realistically given the factors involved, regardless of if this is something you want to happen or not, right? The truth is, you go under 300, you got to have extenuating circumstances to keep your job in most cases, but we'll see what actually happens. I want to talk about today three things that I think, regardless of any controversy about what coach or GM should be fired, three things that's got to be done by whoever's in charge, whether that be Andrew Berry or Kevin Stefanski or somebody else. So let's talk about it. If you don't know, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I do Browns content every day here, multiple times a day. My name is Victor Sweet from Four Brothers. Let's jump into it, man. The first thing that I think the Browns should do is make it clear, like clearly indicate that they are moving on from the idea of Deshaun Watson being your de facto starting quarterback. Now, this doesn't mean you have to cut him. I understand it's not wise to cut Deshaun Watson right now or next year, right? Like, it wouldn't make sense. You would accelerate all of your cap into 1 year. That would make it more expensive over more time when it comes to salary cap space. It just doesn't make sense for the Cleveland Browns to do that, right? That's not what a good team would do or a smart general manager would do, and it's not really the most feasible thing. I don't expect you to cut Deshaun Watson. Hell, you can even hold a roster spot for Deshaun Watson. I'm not really even going to be tripping over that. And in some circumstances, you might have to play Deshaun Watson again. We'll see if that comes down to it, but there are circumstances that exist where Deshaun Watson starts a game, and it doesn't bother me. But what you absolutely have to do is make it clear that Deshaun Watson's presence on this team is temporary until his contract expires. You cannot go into this season with the idea that you're going to give Deshaun Watson another try as a starter, right? If you go into 2025 and your quarterback room is Deshaun Watson in DTR, you are basically providing zero hope to anybody in the fan base that things will get better anytime soon or anytime worth watching. You basically be sending the flag to the fan base, don't watch. You be sending the flag to the locker room, don't care about this year, right? Because we know at this point, starting Deshaun Watson is just not going to be a winning move. There was a time in 2023 where he was playing well enough to where you thought, hey, you might be able to do something with him at the quarterback position. But how severely he bottomed out last year, and look, you can make the argument that Deshaun isn't that bad. He just looked that bad because of the shoulder injury combined with the offensive line play. The problem is, if you're going to blame the shoulder injury in 2024, you're undoubtedly going to be in the same position to blame the Achilles injury in 2025 and 2026. And by 2026, his contract will be expired. So no matter how you divide it up, you're going to have an excuse to why Deshaun Watson didn't play well and justify giving him another year if you look at it like that. Here's how I see it. He stunk in 2024, a level that you cannot get to. I understand the offensive line was not playing well, and that contributed to him not looking good. I understand that he was coming off a throwing shoulder injury, and that contributed to him not looking good. But he dipped so far below the bar of what is acceptable in the NFL from a quarterback, like just like a regular starting quarterback, that I can't sit here and act like those excuses hold the same weight, because it's not like he was like decent to below average and it was obvious that if he gets healed up, he's going to be good. This was a situation where he was one of the worst quarterbacks we had seen in the NFL in quite some time. And if he heals up and gets better, he might just be one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL again. Doesn't quite make sense to me to hang on to this. He's 30 now. He's coming off an Achilles injury. There's really no upside in hanging on to Watson. But if you're the Cleveland Browns, you have to make this clear that you're moving on from him. So what does that look like, right? The Browns making it clear that they're moving on from Deshaun Watson. How can they do this in free agency or in the draft, and which way do I prefer? Now, I'm just going to tell you right now, I prefer the draft, right? But if you're looking at how to tackle this in free agency, that would mean, like, in free agency, you not only go after Jameis Winston, but you go after Jacoby Brissett. Right? Like, that would tell me right there, oh, there's going to be a quarterback competition. They're not really thinking about playing Deshaun Watson. Like, they're going to have a backup for Jameis Winston, and then maybe DTR comes in and beats the backup. He does it every preseason, but then, like, shows us he shouldn't be the backup during the regular season. So if we fall for that one again, that's just on us. But if you go after multiple veteran quarterbacks in free agency, I think that will be something that tells me if you went after like Kirk Cousins or something like that, that would tell me you're clearly making a move to move on from Deshaun Watson. And in the draft, it's obvious. I think if you draft a quarterback in the first 3 rounds, you're making it clear that Deshaun Watson is not who you're planning on playing for significant portions of the year. So doing one of those two things, and I think it's justified to do it this year. If you can go out, get a Kirk Cousins, the cap hit's not going to be crazy because he doesn't have any guaranteed money after this year. So you would only be inheriting a $29 million cap hit for Kirk Cousins. You could restructure Deshaun's contract with the injury to make that work. And it's not like you're adding extra money years on after that for Kirk Cousins because he has no guaranteed money after this year, well, after next year. So that is one way you can obviously signal that you're moving on. That is the most expensive way to do it. In this draft, and maybe I'm on an island on this, but I think that there are quarterbacks in this draft class. Not as many as years past. It's not like the deepest quarterback draft of all time. But I do think there are some quarterbacks in this draft that are definitely worth taking a look at in the first 3 rounds. I think there's like 10 of them that I think are worth taking a look at in the first 3 rounds. And if you go out and you get one of those guys, you draft them in the first 3 rounds. And I think where you draft them is important, right? DTR being a 5th round pick, that's a throwaway flyer. That's not somebody who's guaranteed to usurp somebody. But if you draft somebody in the first 3 rounds, it is likely that you're going to start that quarterback for an extended period of time to give him a try, right? DTR is a 5th round pick. You're not going to start him from 12 games to see what you got in him, right? But a 3rd round pick, a 2nd round pick, a 1st round pick, you obviously are going to commit yourself to starting an extended amount of games with them. Either those moves or those moves combined or whatever kind of combination, as long as they make it clear in the offseason that they are moving on from the Watson era as him being the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns or the de facto starter, right? Then I'm going to be satisfied with the direction of the team, because that to me, I think, is the biggest thing that needs to be addressed. Deshaun Watson is an elephant in the room. There's going to be a large portion of the fan base and the locker room that's not going to have faith in this team as long as you're running with the Watson is our starter plan. And you could change the coach. You could change it to Mike Vrabel. But if Mike Vrabel makes it clear that he's going to stick with Deshaun Watson next year, let me tell you something. Mike Vrabel going to get fired in a year and a half. Like, nothing's going to change until that move is made clear. That could be Kevin. That could be the front office. That could be anything. But if you don't make it clear that you're moving on from this Watson era and you have internally declared the Watson trade finally as a L and you're no longer trying to recoup value from it, okay, we could do something with that, right? As long as we have accepted where they are. But if they keep trying to, and the reason I'm worried about this is because they didn't bench Watson on their own accord. So they kind of went and rolled with this. And if they keep living in that delusion that this Watson thing is still worth trying out, they're going to end in an even bigger catastrophic failure than this season was. So they got to make it clear they're moving on from that. I don't think we could take another year of trying to wheel out Watson and see what happens, especially if he's going to be coming off an Achilles injury in the middle of the season next year. Second thing I think needs to be done, you got to move on from Bubba Ventrone. Who you move on from him, I think will be interesting, right? Because I did like that Bubba was a former player, and I think that he helped Kevin with some of the player stuff because we haven't seen him have those kind of issues since Bubba's been here. But he's just not good at his job. Like the special teams coordinating stuff is just so bad on this team. The punt return coverage, the kick return coverage, our selection of kick returners and punt returners, it just doesn't feel up to snuff, right? Like, why are we giving Kadarius Toney a shot, right? Because he can maybe return punts. He wasn't even that good at returning punts at Kansas City. He just had one good punt return in the Super Bowl. So yeah, I'm not in love with the moves that Bubba Ventrone has co-signed. I'm not in love with the performance here. It's been 2 years. I think you've given it a fair shake. I think it's time to switch that move out and go with somebody else, because special teams, man, it hurts you until it doesn't. Think about last year where even when we had great performance from our specialists, and your specialists aren't really dictated by what your special teams coach is. But even when you look at the great performance we had by the Brown specialists in 2023, where Corey Bojorquez was punting like a madman and Dustin Hopkins was making every kick. Well, what took Dustin Hopkins out? A kick return that he tried to play defense on and pulled his hamstring on. If we had better coordination, we don't lose Dustin Hopkins for the whole end of the season. Anyways, above Ventrone, the coverage stuff has just been so bad. I think he has to go. The third thing that needs to happen, no matter what, for this team to get better, they absolutely 1,000% have to commit to getting younger across the line of scrimmage on both sides. The Browns are aging in the interior. They have aged in the interior of the offensive line, right? But you're going to have vets like Shelby Harris, like Maurice Hurst, where it doesn't make sense to keep them. You're going to need to add some new young players in the interior of this defensive line that can hold it down. Right now, you got Michael Hall, and that's about it. On the edges, you're doing a lot better. Alex Wright does a good job. Isaiah McGuire is a good player back out there. You got Obo Okoronkwo. Myles Garrett isn't super old. Like, you have that settled in on the edges, but it's really interior offensive line, interior defensive line is where most of the work needs to be done. And I think this is a good draft to address both of those areas, right? I want to get a real replacement for Wyatt Teller in the works, right? Maybe not this year, but I think if you want to trade back in the first round to try to get more picks, I think some of these tackles that a lot of people love, they actually would be really, really good guards. And if you want to do that, put them at guard, I think that makes sense. Unfortunately, this year, I don't think this is the year to go crazy on tackle. Maybe take a flyer in the third round at tackle, but I don't think this is a crazy year for tackle. You're not going to fix the tackle portion of the offensive line this offseason long term. I think that's 2026's job to do that, right? But in 2025, you can definitely attack that interior. The Browns, the strength of this team used to be that interior on both sides used to be able to move the line of scrimmage, right? That's what they did well last year. That's what they did well on both sides of the ball. Now this year, they're not getting that push defensively. They're not getting that push offensively. And you see what the team has fallen into since then. But committing to get younger on that line of scrimmage, especially on the interior of both sides, I think is a move that will help this team get back to where they're supposed to get back to, right? Just the fundamentals of this, right? Admit the Watson trade was a failure. If you do that, you move like you know the Watson trade was a failure, there's a path forward. Look at the Broncos right now. Like, look, I'm not the biggest fan of Bo Nix as a prospect, which I think makes a point even clearer about drafting a quarterback in this year's draft. A lot of people were iffy on Bo Nix as a prospect. He turned out to be fine so far in his NFL career. that means that like a lot of these prospects, people are turning their nose up because they're not Caleb Williams or Trevor Lawrence. They probably have a lot of value there that you can get out of them if you just put them in the right spot. And if they can bounce back from that whole Russell Wilson thing and have a worthwhile season going on right now, the Browns can bounce back from this whole Deshaun Watson thing, especially if they're doing that. Like, think about what the Broncos are doing right now. They're bouncing back from this Russell Wilson thing in a year where they're like still paying $84 million on at least in cap space for Russell Wilson. So anything is possible when it comes to doing that, but you got to do what they did, right? The Broncos decided we're not going to act like this thing's a W anymore. It's just a failure. We're just going to move on from it however we can. And that's how they could move on from it. How the Browns move on from Watson's going to be different. But they got to make it clear that they're moving on from it. Because if they hang on to this Watson thing, they'll die with the Watson thing. And that doesn't matter if you change coaches, if you change general managers, that's going to be what happens here. So move on from the Watson era. Admit internally this was an L. Just chalk it up. Loss is what it is. You do that, you're already in the right direction, right? That's one. Number two, move on from Bubba Ventrone. Admit that didn't work out. That's cool. And then just use your resources in the draft. Maybe be thrifty in free agency. Same way you got Wyatt Teller, right? Maybe use one of those late round picks to go get somebody that you like that's a guard or something like that, or a tackle to develop them. But really commit your resources this offseason to the line of scrimmage. That's the part that on this team that they needed most. You commit those resources to the interior. You move on from Watson. You move on from Ventrone. I could see easily a world where the Browns aren't going to be world beaters next year, but they could be a playoff contender if you just play your cards correctly, because you have the cards to play yourself out of this sticky situation. We're seeing teams do it right now. You have that same ability. You have those same resources at hand. So make it happen. That's the three things that I think that they need to do. In my opinion, firing Andrew Berry, firing Kevin Stefanski, if you're not going to do these three things, you're wasting your time, right? And keeping Kevin Stefanski, keeping Andrew Berry, if you're not going to do these three things, you're wasting your time. I want whoever's in charge is going to do these three things, because I think these are the three things that the Browns need desperately. If it's Andrew Berry and Kevin, cool. Love the continuity. If it's not, because they're not willing to do these three things, then you got to go, right? Because if you don't change these things, you're not going to get better next year. You're going to be in the same exact spot next year. So these are the three things I think they need to change. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.